Today's reading from 50 Political Ideas We Should Know. We read number 1 before, so now we're going to read number 2, Justice. And yeah, so let's get to it. Justice. Oh, sorry, I gotta stop hitting my knees up against this. Oh, I'm a Neanderthal. Alright. Justice. We can all recognize the stark injustice of children slaving in sweatshops or starving where food is readily available, of people dying of AIDS for want of exorbitantly priced medicines, or suffering torture and imprisonment without trial. A sense of justice, or more particularly a consciousness of justice, appears to come naturally, almost instinctively, to humans. It may not be easy to define what justice is, but we seem to know it, or the lack of it, when we see it. That is the pre-intro part. Well, sorry. I guess this is kind of weird, looking at my head, I guess, but I don't know. Whatever. You just you could just listen. So, beneath this sensitivity to injustice, there is often an awareness of incongruity, of a dislocation between what people suffer and what we feel they deserve or have a right to expect. This association between justice and the idea of balance or proportion is very ancient, going back at least to Plato and Aristotle. In the case of justice as administered by law, it is symbolized by the figure of justice personified, holding up a pair of scales. You know, the blind lady with the scales. The Greeks on justice. In Plato's highly distinctive theory, presented most fully in the Republic, he draws a parallel between justice in his ideal state and moral excellence in individuals. Just as justice in the states reside in the three classes of citizens, rulers, guardians, and producers, achieving a proper balance or social harmony in the performance of their duties, so the moral well-being of an individual depends on a proper balance or inner harmony between the three parts of the soul: reason, emotion, appetites. The logic of Plato's notion of injustice as harmony readily leads to the view that the good of the state is inseparable from, or perhaps identical to, the realization of justice within it. The elevation of justice to the position of cardinal or supreme political virtue has been more or less explicit in much subsequent political theory. Thus, for the Roman Cicero, for instance, in his capacity as political theorist, justice is the crowning glory, the sovereign mistress and queen of all the virtues. Developing the notion of balance or proportion, Aristotle identifies the essence of justice as people getting their due. Justice is done, in life as in law, when there is a fitting congruence between the fate that a person suffers and the fate that they deserve to suffer, a proper balance between what a person gets and what a person ought to get. Generally, this variety of justice, so-called distributive justice, concerns the fair or just distribution within a community or society of the necessary limited resources, benefits, and burdens, including rights and obligations. Both the good governance of a state and its stability depend crucially on the presence, and the visible presence, of justice of this kind. This was clearly understood by the French Enlightenment philosopher Denis Diderot, who commented that justice is the first virtue of those who command, and stops the complaints of those who obey. With fear or favor, as well as carrying a pair of scales, justice personified is blindfolded. She is required not only to be balanced in her judgments, but to be even-handed and blind to differences such as party, friendship, and kindred, in Joseph Addison's phrase. Impartiality demands that all differences that lie beyond people's control, such as the color of their skin or the place of their birth, be disregarded. Justice is not blind to all differences, however. Being even-handed does not mean treating everyone equally. We may all agree in principle that like should be treated alike, but no two people are the same, so what is due to them is different. The demand of justice is that everyone who is similarly placed in moral relevant respects should be treated equally. In other words, equal treatment is required unless there are good reasons for departing from it. The difficulties, of course, arise when we move beyond this measure of consensus. Firstly, we may wonder what equality consists of. There is a huge gulf between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. Even if life's opportunities were equally accessible to all, different talent and luck would still ensure that people ended up occupying a very wide range of positions in society. Then there is the question of what counts as morally relevant reasons for departing from an equal distribution of the good and the bad things in society. It is just and fair that my superior skills, or greater intelligence, or appetite for hard work bring me a share of life's rewards? Or is it the business of a just society to even out the inequalities that would otherwise arise from our differing natural endowments? John Rawls and Justice as Fairness. The most significant contribution to the debate over justice in the second half of the 20th century was made by the U.S. political philosopher John Rawls. In A Theory of Justice, written in 1971, Rawls agrees that any conception of social justice must comprise the notion of impartiality, that if the principles on which a social system is based are biased towards a particular group, that system is automatically rendered unjust. The most influential aspect of Rawls' account is his answer to the question of what counts as a morally sufficient reason for departing from equal treatment. He argues that people placed behind an imaginary veil of ignorance, which conceals all personal interests and allegiances, will endorse what he calls the difference principle in order to safeguard their own future and interests. According to this principle, inequalities in the distribution of scarce goods or resources are justified only if they result in society's worst off members being better off than they would have otherwise been. Tax cuts for the wealthy, for example, would be justified and just, provided that they resulted in an improvement of the fortunes of the least well off. Clearly, Rawls' difference principle can be used to justify very large disparities between the least and the most advantaged members of society. His conception of social justice remains the focus of intensive debate and criticism, both positive and negative. The condensed idea of the crowning glory of the virtues. And that's it. That is the chapter Justice in the book 50 Political Ideas You Really Need to Know.